It looks like if you're trying to win a war, you have to A, give more resources to it. 2, not trying to attack from like a million different fronts and overwhelm your enemy. That doesn't work really either. And that is what Russia is facing right now. Now, that's because it looks like there's been some news that's coming out showing that essentially Russia is now reposturing to the eastern region of Ukraine to try and win this thing. Says here, Ukraine questions Russian movements as troops regroup. Now, it says here that the Russian movements are following promises to scale back attacks on the capital, Kyiv. If you guys have not been following this, this is the major city that's more centralized in Ukraine, which has essentially been kind of the focus of if Ukraine were to lose Kyiv, would this now change the pattern of the scale of this war and kind of cut off some of the main supply and put in a new proxy government? That is what people were expecting, but it looks like Kyiv has been held up by the Ukrainian nationals there and have done a phenomenal job. White House officials say Zelensky also updated the U.S. leaders on ceasefire talks. Biden promised another $500 million in aid and more money to help Ukraine's military. I want to be fair, anytime they've talked about ceasefire, any of these things in Russia, they have never actually occurred. They've had these corridors, which have been a way for people to get humanitarian aid, health issues handled, whatever else. But these people have always been met with some kind of fire, essentially, within 30 minutes of this corridor being closed off. But that's why the Ukrainians don't even believe this at all, because how many times have we discussed this? As diplomatic efforts continue, so does violence. Officials in the northern city of Chernihiv say Russian forces attacked all night long. And like I said, the deputy prime minister says, we do not trust Russia's statements and promises. The communication brought yesterday by Russian side following the negotiation is an element to give some floor of army to regroup. Now, I do want to talk about regrouping. This has not been something that is out of the ordinary. We saw it across World War I when trench warfare was very common, and it would actually fatigue some of the people, and people would rotate through the trenches in order to make sure that they would actually be able to have good morale and be able to feel like they were not fighting an endless war. So we might be seeing a big change of troops in this situation, maybe to try and reinvigorate some of these people that are on the front lines. That's what I would say is probably happening. I don't think they're going to totally readdress everything to the east. The Russians have said they want to complete what they call liberation of the eastern region of Donbass, long held by Russian-backed forces, which has already been their strong point anyway. Major General Igor, however you say this, spokesperson for the Russian Defense Ministry, said high-precision air-launched missiles destroyed large fuel depot. The depot were supplying Ukrainian army vehicles in the Donbass region. And if you look at the map, we've talked about Kyiv. We also are going to talk about Mariupol, which Mariupol is another stronghold in this region. And it's this port town, which has been like the last stronghold of this entire area. And they have struggled to try and make it happen. They've talked about peace talks. They've talked about these other things. But people believe these two cities are the main points that have been held and have essentially held off the Russians and their morale entirely. The U.S. defense officials are attacking the movements from Washington. The officials say less than 20% of tactical groups near Kyiv have moved out, adding not one is headed to Russia. And Press Secretary John Kirby says if the Russians are serious about de-escalating, because that's their claim here, then they should send them home. But they're not doing that, at least not yet. Now, the U.S. support has really fallen under the radar recently. There's another article talking about our new level of support that's been there. But also, let's not forget that these people are, a lot of them, conscripts that are being forced into military service. On top of that, if they go back or retreat, they've been known to be pretty much as a person that is not in alliance with Russia. Where are they supposed to go? They're being held captive as prisoners of war if they stay on the Ukraine side. You could say, yes, I'll fight with Ukraine, but they're not going to risk that. They can't go back to their homes either. And the people that are dying in masses are obviously not going back home, which we have not talked about here as well, where they're being projected upwards of 15,000 people. But there's a whole new level at which the West is now fighting that by allowing more information to go through. We're going to start with that new support that seems no one has really been talking about, but it says U.S. sends 100 killer drones called Switchblades to Ukraine. Do you guys remember only, a few weeks ago, we were talking about this whole debacle of having these aircraft from Poland being sent to Ukraine and the U.S. would backfill those. So it's this kind of weird off-posturing way of getting resources to the front lines. Well, that doesn't seem to really hold the same level of threat, I would say, as these killer drones, but they can all do some severe damage here. U.S. included 100 killer drones in colossal weapons package for Ukraine that President Joe Biden approved earlier this month, U.S. officials confirmed Wednesday. Celeste Wallander, Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, told lawmakers that Kyiv asked for weapons which are dubbed kamikaze drones. Washington says the U.S. included 100 killer drones in colossal weapons package for Ukraine that President Joe Biden approved earlier this month, U.S. officials confirmed Wednesday. And then Assistant Secretary of Defense then goes on to say that the Security Affairs told lawmakers that Kyiv asked for weapons which are dubbed, quotations, kamikaze drones. We have committed 100 Switchblade tactical unnamed aerial system to be delivered in the most recent package of presidential drawdown, Wallander said in the testimony before the House Armed Services Committee. So I'm wondering if this is like a very strategic way of saying, we're giving you tools, use them how you will, but we never gave you anything to actually arm up and harm these people. Now, if you guys don't know about drones and how they operate, they can be done for battlefield assessment, battlefield damage, and understanding what's happened across enemy lines without having much risk to having a pilot go across those lines. They define the kamikaze drones and they say there are two variants of the weapon, the Switchblade 300 and 600. It was not immediately clear which version the U.S. deployed to Ukraine. The 300 variant is designed to small targets. It can fit a rucksack weight a little over 5 pounds and has a range of 10 miles. The 600 version of the weapon is designed to destroy tanks and other armored vehicles. It weighs slightly more than 120 pounds and has a range of more than 40 miles. What you should take away from this is they're talking about air-to-surface targets. Now, you guys have probably heard about the no-fly zone that we've discussed in length before. And when that comes down to this, you're talking about air-to-air targets. That is a lot more capability than what we're talking about here. Also, you're looking at the range is much smaller here. So I'm going to be honest. Yes, this is support in an aerial aviation sense, but it's not the same support as a no-fly zone, but it's still going to give them a lot more leverage without having to train people really how to use these. But they, again, did not say that they would have any ordnance on board with these. The Switchblades are equipped with cameras, navigation systems, and guided explosives. The weapons can be programmed to automatically strike targets that are miles away or can loiter above a target until engaged by the operator's strike. Both the 300 and 600 weapons system is destroyed after striking the desired target. Each Switchblade is a single-use or kamikaze drone. Now, according to my research on this, they are able to use what are known as Hellfire missiles. These are manufactured by Lockheed, and they cost about $6,000 a piece in order to drop them. So you guys remember us talking about the death tolls and all those issues there. But what I want to get into is the fact that these numbers could be good, could be bad, but there's a possibility as to why. But what the West side is doing about this is getting pretty intense as they're now using facial recognition. NATO has estimated the number of Russian soldiers killed in Ukraine since the invasion began at between 7,000 and 15,000. That's a big margin, but the higher estimate roughly equals the number of Soviet soldiers killed in over a decade fighting in Afghanistan, which is a reasonable number to look for because if you look at the U.S. over in Afghanistan, that was only about 2,000-ish in comparison. I don't want to say only, but, I'm just looking at pure number statistics here. Now the question, how accurate are they? In war conditions, you have the fog of war, which makes it very difficult to get accurate numbers, said Walter Dorn, professor of defense studies at the Royal Military College. In order to see the deaths, you'd have to go places where there's people dying, which usually means there's a dangerous threat. So it's hard for objective observers to find that kind of number. And what they've said is they've pretty much had to rough estimate what these are because they know how many people are in a battalion for the Russians. They know how many people go in each tank. If you minus this many tanks, and I'm going to show a little statistic here of how many tanks, how many planes and things like that have been gone down that they've actually accounted for. But they do say that there are two sides of this. The inflation side of we as the West could look at this and say, well, we want it to look really bad. But I mean, we've said it could also be very much lower from the officials on our government side. But Ukrainians could be overestimating. Then the Russians could be underestimating on purpose to try and say that it's not really much of an issue. But what they say here, they don't care about their personnel. Their vehicles are not equipped to protect their people. They are not like our vehicles with fire suppression systems and all that he said. I have not seen an armored ambulance this entire war. We have them, but I haven't seen an armored ambulance at all. Now, I do want to say one of the friends of the channel, Jake Bro, has actually shown one of the armored vehicles that they have where they've welded these different types of cages on top, because the ordnance used against them is actually coming from the top down. And so this is to protect them, but it really hasn't done a good job. Very makeshift. And on top of that, as he does mention in his video as well, there are a lot of barriers to this, as they don't actually have armored vehicles. A lot of them are just Toyota vehicles or whatever else they have around, which weapons are now being welded onto them, and that's it, which means pretty much it's a suicide mission. Now on to that facial recognition. Ukraine is using facial recognition tech to identify dead Russian soldiers and inform their families. You guys think you guys have any, security or privacy? You are mistaken. I will tell you one bit of anecdotal evidence. You know those Disney characters that are princesses that dress up? Well, we didn't know this until I actually visited Disney World, but the people that work as those characters were being recognized by Facebook recognition software, where Disney had to talk with Facebook and say, can you not put these people together? Because they were seeing Jenny getting smammered out in town while she's with her friends, is taking shots back. And then the next photo, she's with little Sally. So this technology and information is very reliable and is actually pretty darn good. They say, as a courtesy to the mothers of the soldiers, we are disseminating this information over social media to at least let families know that they have lost their sons, and then enable them to come collect their bodies. Fedorov told the wire service through a translator. Its software identifies people using public images scraped from the web and social media platforms without permission to create a searchable database. If you want to identify someone, you simply upload a photo or snap a new one, and Clearview software attempts to make a match. So it looks like this is software that's been used by federal agencies, law enforcement, things like that, and it's something that could be used. Obviously, is this the most reliable way to identify these soldiers? Probably not, because DNA would be the most likely that they could, but I don't know if they've actually gotten that much information on these guys before they join or go into conscript, as seeing their capabilities being diminished or degraded. How reliable is this? But as far as this goes, this is some of the massive updates that we're seeing here with Russia, and I want to let you guys know that we're going to keep covering this. If you like this content, like and comment and subscribe down below. I appreciate it. And if you guys have any other topics or ideas that you want on this channel, hit me up on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, or down in the comments below. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.